Sophie's face was streaked with tears when I pulled into the Walmart lot. She clutched that one-eared rabbit like it was the only thing left in the world. My daughter Melissa stood beside her, garbage bags piled at her feet, a bruise forming on her arm. "He called us trash," Sophie whispered. "Had security throw us out." I knelt down, kissed Sophie's forehead. Time for him to learn who owns everything. Quick moment, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I love knowing where you're all tuning in from. My name is Virgil Dunaway. I'm 58 years old, and I own a salvage yard. That's what people see when they look at me. Grease under the fingernails. Rust-patched Ford pickup, older than some of my employees. Flannel shirts from the clearance rack at Tractor Supply. They see what I want them to see. I pulled into the salvage yard with Sophie asleep against Melissa's shoulder, her one-eared rabbit clutched to her chest. The tears had dried somewhere around Route 7, replaced by the kind of exhausted silence that comes after a child's world breaks apart. The double-wide trailer that serves as my office sat where it always has, wedged between a mountain of crushed aluminum cans and a row of stripped engine blocks. The smell of rust and motor oil, the clang of metal on metal from the sorting line in the distance. Melissa carried Sophie inside while I grabbed the garbage bags from the truck bed. 3 bags. 8 years of marriage reduced to 3 garbage bags. I set Sophie on the worn leather couch where she'd napped 100 times before. She stirred, clutched the rabbit tighter, and settled back into sleep. Melissa stood in the center of the room, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the filing cabinets and the battered 1923 Steinway upright wedged between them. Eleanor's mother's piano. Eleanor had insisted we keep it, even when selling it might have saved the business in that first year. "Dad, I'm sorry," she said. "I should have listened when you—" Nothing to apologize for. I unpacked the garbage bags. Sophie's clothes. A few books. That framed photo of us at the salvage yard from last summer. "You loved him. That's not a crime." He said, "Our family is trash." I folded one of Sophie's shirts, set it aside. "Did he now? He's filing for emergency custody. Says, you're a negative influence." I kept folding. "Roy Beckham's already working on it." Melissa looked at me, confused. "How? I just called you an hour ago." "Been prepared for a while," I said. 36 years of building something that couldn't be taken away. 6 years of watching Bradley and getting ready for exactly this. I inherited this place from my father when I was 22. Heart attack took him on a Tuesday morning while he was hauling a transmission out of a wrecked Buick. By Thursday, I was sitting in a lawyer's office learning how much debt he'd left behind. 15 acres of rusted hulks. 3 months of back taxes. A mortgage payment due in 2 weeks that I couldn't make. And Eleanor, my wife of 8 months, had just told me she was pregnant. The lawyer suggested bankruptcy. I told him I'd figure something else out. That first year, I worked 18-hour days, sorted scrap by hand, learned which junkyards in a 50-mile radius paid the best prices for copper, aluminum, steel. Drove loads myself because I couldn't afford drivers. Pay soup for dinner because fresh food meant less money for the yard. Eleanor never complained. She brought me sandwiches at midnight, helped with the books when her pregnancy allowed, and never once suggested I give up. Melissa was born in April. I held her in the hospital room while Eleanor slept, this tiny thing with her mother's eyes, and I made a promise I've kept ever since. I would build something that couldn't be taken away. I started reading library books on commodities trading, pages dog-eared and coffee-stained, technical manuals on recycling processes, EPA, regulations that most salvage operators ignored, but that I memorized. I taught myself the difference between backwardation and contango from a library book with margin notes in someone else's handwriting. I got the yard certified for hazardous materials processing, signed contracts with manufacturers who needed proper disposal for industrial waste, applied for environmental grants that my competitors didn't know existed. By the time Melissa started kindergarten, I'd opened a trading account at a Chicago brokerage. Small positions at first: copper futures, aluminum hedges. I'd buy contracts when prices dipped and sell when they rose, always keeping enough physical inventory to back my positions. The other junkyard owners thought I was crazy. They saw scrap metal. I saw a commodity with predictable price cycles and arbitrage opportunities. Eleanor died when Melissa was 16. Lung cancer. The doctors had no explanation. For 3 months after, I couldn't play the piano. I'd sit at the bench some nights, hands resting on the closed fallboard, and just listen to the silence. Melissa pulled me through, same way Eleanor would have. She made dinner when I forgot to eat. She kept the books when I couldn't focus. She reminded me, without saying it directly, that I still had someone who needed me to be strong. 20 years ago, a young mechanic named Roy Beckham started working at the yard. Smart kid, worked days hauling scrap, studied nights at the community college. I found him reading a law textbook during lunch one afternoon. "Planning to sue somebody?" I asked. "Planning to defend people," he said. "Guys like my dad lost his house because he couldn't afford a lawyer who knew what he was doing." I paid Roy's tuition. Night school at the State University, then law school. Took him 9 years to finish while working full-time. When he passed the bar, he offered to pay me back. I told him I didn't want money. I wanted loyalty. 8 years ago, Melissa married Bradley Ashworth III. The wedding was at the Georgian Revival mansion Bradley's grandfather built. All Corinthian columns and temperature-controlled wine cellars and staff in white gloves. Bradley's mother Constance seated me at the service staff table by accident. I watched my daughter dance with her new husband and saw the kind of man he was. The way he adjusted his cufflinks before saying the caterer had done acceptable work for the price. The way he talked about his development company as though he'd built it himself, when anyone who read the business section knew his father did the work. The way he looked at Melissa like an accessory that matched his lifestyle. The Ashworth family was hemorrhaging money. Grandfather's bankruptcy 5 years earlier had gutted their actual wealth, but they'd maintained the appearance of prosperity through credit and reputation. Bradley drew a $400,000 salary from a company that hadn't completed a new project in a decade. I started buying. Dunaway Holdings, LLC acquired the mansion deed in 2018 for $1.2 million during the bankruptcy fire sale. The bank was happy to sell. I was happy to remain anonymous. Dunaway Properties, Inc., registered in Wyoming where beneficial ownership is untraceable, purchased ground leases on 6 commercial properties, including the land beneath Riverbend Commercial Plaza, Bradley's flagship development. Through a network of 17 shell companies managed by Roy, I acquired Bradley's construction loans from 3 regional banks. They sold at discount because the underlying collateral was questionable. I bought because I knew what the collateral was worth. Total hidden assets, over $40 million. I never told Melissa. I believed I was building a safety net, a way to catch her if she fell. I didn't realize I was building ammunition. Every Thursday evening, I meet Deputy Frank Mosley and 4 other men at May's Diner. We grew up on the same block. Frank became a sheriff's deputy. Harold Vance retired from the bench after 30 years as a county judge. Ernie Patterson inspects commercial buildings for the county. Marcus Williams runs the local IBEW chapter. And Desmond Carter buries people at the funeral home his grandfather opened in 1952. Between us, we know everything that happens in this county. Heard the Ashworth boy's been talking to divorce attorneys, Frank mentioned 3 months ago. Heard he's hiding money in the Caymans, Harold added. Heard his latest project is 6 months behind schedule and bleeding cash, Ernie said. I listened. I always listen. That's the thing about being underestimated. People talk freely around you. They assume the junkyard owner doesn't understand high finance, doesn't track property records, doesn't have a network of shell companies and a commodities account, with more zeros than Bradley Ashworth's entire net worth. They assume wrong. After closing each evening, I sit at Eleanor's mother's piano and play. Chopin nocturnes mostly. The Opus 9, no, 2, that Eleanor loved. My calloused fingers move across the keys with a precision that would surprise anyone who only sees me hauling scrap. The office is silent except for the music. Dust motes float in the evening light through the windows. The filing cabinets hold deeds to properties Bradley thinks he owns. The commodities account statement on my desk shows numbers he couldn't comprehend. I finished unpacking Sophie's things and set the last shirt on the pile. Through the window, the salvage yard stretched to the tree line. 15 acres that started as my father's failure and became my empire. Melissa watched me from the doorway. "Dad," she said quietly, "what are you going to do?" Sophie slept on the couch, that one-eared rabbit pressed against her cheek. The bruise darkened on my daughter's arm. The garbage bags held everything Bradley allowed them to keep. "What I've been preparing to do for 6 years," I said. I walked to the filing cabinet and pulled out a weathered leather portfolio. Set it on the desk. Opened it to the first document, a certified deed with my name as beneficial owner, stamped recorded in red. The address listed was the Georgian Revival Mansion where Bradley Ashworth thought he lived. "Everything he thinks he owns," I told Melissa, "belongs to me." The wedding reception was the first time I saw it. That gesture. Bradley stood at the head table, accepting congratulations from his country club friends, and Melissa's hand rested on his arm like she belonged there. Maybe she did. I wanted to believe she did. Constance Ashworth glided toward me with a smile designed to make people feel exactly as important as she wanted them to feel. "Mr. Dunaway," she said, "I'm afraid there's been a small mix-up with the seating. Your card seems to have been placed at the wrong table." She guided me toward the back of the ballroom, past the family section, past the business associates, past the college friends and the distant cousins, all the way to a table near the kitchen doors, where the catering staff moved in and out with trays of champagne. "I do hope you understand," Constance said. "These things happen at large events." I understood. The table seated 8. 3 waitstaff on break, 2 of the florist's assistants, an audiovisual technician checking cables, and me. From across the room, Bradley noticed. He looked at his mother, looked at me. Then he adjusted his cufflinks, those monogrammed platinum cufflinks his father left him, and laughed. "Mother being mother," he said when Melissa asked about the seating. I read his lips from across the room. He adjusted his cufflinks again. "Don't make a scene, darling." That was the first time I saw the gesture, the signal before cruelty. I would see it hundreds more times over the next 8 years. The first year of their marriage, I learned to read Bradley's patterns. The cufflink adjustment preceded every insult. A nervous tic, maybe? Or a ritual, a way of reminding himself of his status before reminding others of theirs. I drove my 1987 Ford F-250 to the mansion for Sunday dinner. Same truck I'd driven for 15 years. Same rust patches on the wheel wells. Same only radio. Same bench seat, reupholstered twice. The truck was worth maybe $2,400 on trade-in. My commodities account held more than $50 million. Bradley met me in the driveway before I could park. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and fountain water. Gravel crunched under expensive shoes. Virgil, he adjusted his cufflinks. I've been meaning to discuss the vehicle situation. Vehicle situation. The neighbors have commented. This isn't that kind of neighborhood. He gestured toward the Georgian columns, the manicured hedges, the circular drive designed for Mercedes and BMWs. Perhaps you could park on the service road. Behind the gardener's shed, I drove to the service road, parked behind the gardener's shed, walked a quarter-mile to the front door while Bradley's leased Porsche sat gleaming in the circular drive. Melissa apologized for him that evening. He's under a lot of pressure with the new development. He doesn't mean anything by it. I told her it was fine. Year 2, Thanksgiving arrived with new humiliations. Constance orchestrated the seating chart with surgical precision. The formal dining room held 18, arranged around a mahogany table that Bradley's grandfather had commissioned from a craftsman in Vermont. Constance placed herself at the head, Bradley to her right, Melissa next to Bradley. Then a cascade of Ashworth cousins and business associates, their spouses and partners, arranged by some calculus of social importance. My place card wasn't at the table. I found it in the kitchen. You'll be more comfortable here, Constance explained. The formal dining can be so stuffy. I thought you might prefer something more casual. The kitchen smelled of turkey and rosemary. The staff moved around me with professional efficiency, pretending I wasn't there. I ate alone at a prep counter while 18 people celebrated 30 feet away. 8 years of marriage dignity reduced to kitchen seating. Melissa found me after the meal, her eyes red. She said it was my idea, Melissa whispered. That I suggested you'd be more comfortable here. I didn't. I would never. I know, Bradley said. I was overreacting. That I should be grateful his family accepts our background at all. Our background. As if she hadn't graduated summa cum laude. As if she hadn't built the Women's Shelter Volunteer Program from 12 hours a week to a full operation serving 200 families. Let it go, I told her. It's not worth the fight. She deflated a little. Saw the way she accepted the insult rather than challenge it. Saw the first cracks in the woman who used to argue with me about everything from politics to the proper way to stack scrap metal. The 3rd year, Bradley went after her purpose. The shelter work has to stop, he announced at dinner. I wasn't there. Melissa told me about it later, her voice flat, her eyes focused somewhere past my shoulder. He said it was beneath an Ashworth, that people were talking, that I should focus on charity boards and fundraising galas instead. Visible philanthropy, he called it. What did you say? I said I'd think about it. A week later, she resigned from the shelter. Told the director she had family obligations. Didn't mention that the obligation was her husband's image. Each visit, she sat closer to the door. Spoke in shorter sentences. Checked her phone before answering my questions. She apologized for things that didn't need apologizing. Thanked him for things that should have been standard courtesies between married people. Year 4. Sophie became the target. "The salvage yard is no place for my daughter," Bradley said. Another family dinner. Another cufflink adjustment. She comes home smelling like motor oil. She's picking up language from your workers. Last week, she asked what a transmission does. "She's curious," I said. "She's an Ashworth." He made the name sound like a diagnosis. She should be taking writing lessons, learning piano, building the right relationships with the right families. She's 6 years old. Exactly, the formative years. He turned to Melissa. "No more visits to the junkyard." "I mean it." Melissa nodded. That automatic nod I'd started to hate. But she brought Sophie anyway. Every other Saturday, while Bradley golfed at the country club, Melissa drove Sophie to the salvage yard. The girl learned to sort copper from aluminum. She learned how the crusher worked. She learned to get dirty, be loud, ask questions about everything. "Don't tell Daddy," Sophie would say when they left. 6 years old, already keeping secrets from her father. Frank Mosley's deputy heard it from a caterer's wife. I wasn't welcome at the Ridgeview Club. Bradley made sure of that. "Called you the junkyard dog," Frank told me over coffee at May's. Said Melissa, unfortunately, comes attached to her background. Harold Vance shook his head. "My nephew was at the Ashworth Christmas party last year." Said Bradley told a group of investors that his wife came from limited circumstances that he was generous enough to overlook. "Generous," I repeated. His word. The financial request started in year 5. Bradley never asked me directly. He used Melissa as the intermediary, which made refusing impossible. "Bradley has an investment opportunity," she said. "He needs $50,000 to secure his position. He said he'd pay it back within 6 months. I wrote the check. The money moved to an account I couldn't trace. Bradley never mentioned returns. Never showed statements. Never said the word investment again. 3 months later, there's a trust for Sophie's education. Bradley's managing it, but it needs additional funding. $30,000 would ensure she's set for private school through college. I wrote another check. I never saw documentation for the trust. Never received statements or updates. Just Bradley's assurances, delivered through Melissa, that the money was being properly managed. $80,000. Extracted in 2 transactions. Each request came wrapped in implications that I should be grateful my daughter married into status, that my contributions were the least I could do given my obvious deficiencies, that real wealth shared without complaint. Meanwhile, Ashworth Development Group announced projects that never materialized. The Riverside Retail Center canceled due to financing issues. The Harbor View condominiums indefinitely postponed. The Midtown Mixed-Use Complex abandoned after Bradley couldn't secure tenants. Bradley drew his $400,000 salary regardless. He leased new cars every year, maintained the mansion's 6-car garage, flew first class to development conferences in Miami and Las Vegas and San Diego, returning with stories about potential partnerships that never became actual partnerships. His company was a shell. His wealth was an illusion. Everything he owned, from the mansion to the commercial properties to the loans financing his flagship project, belonged to me. But Melissa didn't know that. She stopped arguing with Bradley's insults, started explaining them, started apologizing for me before I'd done anything wrong. The woman who'd once challenged me on everything became someone who challenged nothing. 2 weeks before that day in the Walmart lot, I joined them for a family dinner. Constance presided over the table. Bradley sat at her right hand. Melissa had positioned herself between Sophie and her husband, a buffer she'd become without realizing it. Sophie was 7 now. old enough to notice things, old enough to ask questions. "Daddy," she said, during a lull in conversation, "why don't you like Grandpa?" The table went silent. Constance's hand stopped mid-reach for her wineglass. Bradley's hand moved toward his cufflinks. Melissa stiffened. "That's not appropriate dinner conversation," Bradley said. "But you never talk to him. And Grandma puts him in the kitchen. And you said his truck is embarrassing." Sophie's voice carried the innocent brutality of childhood observation. "Why, Sophie?" Bradley's voice dropped. "Enough. Leave her alone," Melissa said. I looked at my daughter. She was sitting up straight. Her voice was steady. Something in her expression had shifted. "She asked a simple question," Melissa continued. "Why don't you like my father? This isn't the time or place for. When is the time? When is the place?" Melissa's voice rose. 8 years, Bradley. 8 years of watching you humiliate him, watching your mother seat him with the staff, watching you ban his truck from the driveway like he's something to be ashamed of. "Melissa," Constance's voice carried warning. "No." Melissa turned to her mother-in-law. "You've made your opinion of my family clear from day one. But I'm done apologizing for where I come from. I'm done pretending my father is less than yours because he works with his hands." Bradley stood. His fingers went to his cufflinks. The platinum ones his father left him. The ones he touched before every cruelty. "Your family is trash," he said. "And this conversation is over." The words hung in the air. Sophie's eyes went wide. Melissa's face drained of color. I said nothing. There was nothing to say that the next few weeks wouldn't say better. Later, I learned Bradley had been planning for 2 years, cultivating divorce attorneys, moving assets to accounts he controlled, documenting Melissa's unstable family background, which meant documenting me. He had thought he was hiding assets, securing his position, building a case for custody that would separate Sophie from her mother's low-class influence. He didn't know those assets weren't his to hide. 2 weeks after that dinner, Bradley made his move. I was sorting copper at the yard when my phone lit up with Melissa's name. "Dad," her voice came through flat. The same voice she'd used when she called about her mother's diagnosis. "Bradley just served me papers. He's filing for emergency custody." I set down the wire stripper. "Where's Sophie?" "In her room." "Dad, there are men here." "Security. 2 of them." "Bradley says I have 1 hour to pack what I can carry." I was already moving toward the truck. "I'm coming. He won't let you in." He made that clear. A pause. I heard footsteps in the background. Heavy, not hers. "I have to go. Meet me at the Walmart on Route 9, the one by the highway intersection." The line went dead. I drove faster than I should have. Past the billboard advertising Riverbend Commercial Plaza. Past the Ashworth Development Group headquarters. All glass and chrome and lies. Past every property that bore his name and belonged to me. My phone rang again. Frank Mosley this time. Deputy Frank Mosley, who'd grown up 3 houses down from mine and still met me for coffee every Thursday. "Virgil, where are you?" "Heading to the Ashworth place." "Don't!" His voice was hard. "I'm already here." Neighbor called about a disturbance. "I'm recording everything on body camera." "What's happening?" "Your granddaughter is screaming." "Security is removing your daughter." "And Bradley Ashworth is standing in the doorway, watching with a smile on his face." Frank paused. "Get to the Walmart." "That's where they're going when this is done." "I'll make sure of it." I eased off the accelerator. Frank was a witness now. His body camera was evidence. Whatever was happening at that mansion, it was being recorded. But Sophie was screaming. My granddaughter was screaming while strangers touched her things. The Walmart parking lot was half empty at this hour. Morning shoppers with carts. An elderly couple loading groceries. Normal life happening while mine burned. I parked and waited. 23 minutes. The truck clock marked everyone. Melissa's SUV pulled in with the jerky movements of someone driving through tears. She parked 3 spaces away. Didn't get out. I could see her hands gripping the wheel, knuckles white. I walked over and opened the back door. Sophie threw herself at me. Her small body hit my chest, arms wrapping around my neck, face buried in my flannel. She was shaking. 7 years old and shaking like she'd seen something no child should see. "Grandpa," her voice was muffled against my shirt. They made me put my stuff in garbage bags. I held her, didn't speak, just held her until the shaking slowed. Melissa got out of the driver's seat. Tears had dried in tracks down her face. She moved to the back of the SUV and opened the hatch. 3 garbage bags. Black, hefty bags, the kind you use for yard waste. Inside one, I could see the corner of Sophie's favorite shirt, pink with a unicorn on it. "Show me your arm," I said. Melissa looked at me. Then she rolled up her sleeve. The bruise was already forming. 4 finger-shaped marks where someone had gripped her hard enough to leave a print. The kind of bruise that would photograph well for court. Which one did this? The taller one. When I tried to stop them from going into Sophie's room, Melissa's voice was flat. Bradley watched. He didn't say a word while his employee grabbed me. Just adjusted his cufflinks. Those platinum cufflinks. The gesture before cruelty. What did he say? Exactly. Melissa closed her eyes. When she opened them, her jaw had tightened. "He said to tell you that trash belongs at the junkyard, not in his home. He said his attorneys will ensure Sophie is raised properly, away from your family's influence." I looked down at Sophie, still pressed against me. Her one-eared rabbit was clutched in her fist. She'd had that rabbit since she was 2. Eleanor had bought it for her first birthday, and when the ear tore off, Sophie refused to let us fix it. "He's special now," she'd said. "He has a story." In her other hand was a framed photograph, the one from her nightstand. Sophie and me at the salvage yard last summer, both of us covered in grease, both of us grinning. "What else did you grab?" I asked her. 3 socks. Her voice was small. They didn't match. I couldn't find the matches in time. 3 mismatched socks. A stuffed rabbit missing an ear. A photograph of her grandfather. That's what she reached for when men in suits told her to pack her life into a garbage bag. Melissa pulled her phone from her pocket. "Frank sent me something. Said you'd want to see it." She handed me the phone. A video file. Frank's body camera footage. I pressed play. The image was slightly fish-eyed, distorted at the edges the way body cameras always are. Frank's approach to the mansion, the circular drive, Bradley's leased Porsche gleaming in the morning light. Then the front door opened. Melissa was first, clutching garbage bags to her chest. Her face was streaked with tears. Behind her came Sophie, being guided by a suited man with his hand on her shoulder. Sophie was crying, that hiccuping cry that follows screaming, the exhausted aftermath of terror. The audio was clear. Too clear. "Please." Melissa's voice on the recording. "Just let me get her coat. It's cold outside and, ma'am, you need to keep moving." The security guard. Professional. Detached. Bradley appeared in the doorway. Navy blazer. Fresh haircut. those cufflinks catching the light as he adjusted them. "Make sure they understand," Bradley said to the security team. "They're not to return. If they do, have them arrested for trespassing." "Bradley, please." Melissa stopped walking. "She's your daughter. You can't just. Sophie is an Ashworth." His voice carried across the drive, designed to be heard, designed to be recorded by the mansion's security cameras that he thought he controlled. "I'm ensuring she's raised appropriately, away from influences that have clearly damaged her development. My father has never—" "Your father." Bradley smiled. That satisfied smile I'd seen across dinner tables and at family functions and in every interaction where he believed he held power. "Tell your father that trash belongs at the junkyard, not in my home. Tell him my attorneys will ensure Sophie is raised properly, away from your family's influence." The video ended there. I handed the phone back to Melissa. "The mansion has security cameras," I said. "Bradley installed them 3 years ago. The system backs up to cloud storage." Melissa stared at me. "How do you know that?" "Because I own the security company. The footage uploads to my servers." Her expression changed. Confusion giving way to something else. Something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. "Dad, what do you own?" I knelt down to Sophie's level. She looked at me with those eyes, Eleanor's eyes, red-rimmed from crying but steady now. "Sweetheart, we're going home. And then Grandpa has some work to do." I helped them into the F-250, settled Sophie in the middle of the bench seat, her rabbit on her lap, the photograph propped against the dashboard where she could see it. Melissa climbed in on the passenger side, and I closed her door before walking around to the driver's seat. The engine turned over with that familiar rumble. Same truck I'd driven for 30 years. Same rust patches, same Emerdio that only picked up the country station and NPR. Bradley had banished this truck to the service road behind the gardener's shed because it embarrassed him. I pulled out of the Walmart parking lot and headed toward home. The route took us past landmarks of Bradley's supposed empire. Riverbend Commercial Plaza, 60% complete. The construction cranes still and silent in the morning light. The ground lease for that land expired in 8 months. Only Dunaway Properties, Inc., could renew it. The Ashworth Development Group headquarters slid by, glass walls reflecting the morning sun. Bradley drew $400,000 a year from that company, while it bled money from loans I owned. Then the neighborhood gates, where Bradley had banned my truck. The Georgian Revival mansions, with their manicured lawns and temperature-controlled wine cellars. The deed to the one Bradley lived in sat in a filing cabinet at the salvage yard, stamped with my name. Sophie had stopped crying. She watched the landscape pass, her rabbit tucked under her arm. "Grandpa? Yes? Are we going to be okay?" I reached over and squeezed her hand. "We're going to be fine. What about Mommy's arm?" "That man hurt her." "I know. That's part of the work I have to do." "Why?" Melissa was quiet. She stared out the window, but I could see her reflection in the glass. Her jaw was set. The blankness was gone. Her shoulders had straightened, and her hands lay still in her lap instead of fidgeting. When Eleanor died, Melissa had that same look. Grief done, the work of living would continue. Her mother's daughter, who had never backed down from anything. The salvage yard came into view. 15 acres of rusted hulks and sorted scrap, and a double-wide trailer with a Steinway upright wedged between filing cabinets. Home. I parked next to the office. Sophie climbed out and ran toward the door, rabbit bouncing against her chest. She knew where the couch was. She knew where she was safe. Melissa didn't move. 8 years, she said quietly. 8 years. I made excuses for him. Apologized for my family. Let him treat you like something he'd scraped off his shoe. You loved him. I loved who I thought he was. She turned to face me. What did you mean? About owning things? What else haven't you told me? I looked at the office. At the filing cabinets inside. At 36 years of careful preparation sitting in weathered folders, waiting for this day. Everything Bradley thinks he owns, I said. The house, the business, the loans, the land under his project. It all belongs to me. Has, for years. Melissa was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, not a happy smile. Something harder, something earned. Good, she said. Make him pay for every second Sophie spent screaming. I got out of the truck, walked to the office door, stepped inside and knelt next to the couch where Sophie had already curled up, rabbit pressed to her cheek. I kissed her forehead. Get some rest, sweetheart. Grandpa has some papers to file. That evening, Roy Beckham pulled into the salvage yard at 7:15, headlights cutting through the dark. I watched him park beside my truck, same spot he'd used 20 years ago when he was a grease-stained mechanic studying torts between engine pulls. He carried a weathered leather portfolio under one arm, the kind of case that looked like it had seen decades of use. Corners worn soft, brass clasps, green with age. Sophie was asleep on the office couch, her one-eared rabbit tucked under her chin. Melissa sat at the small table near the window, a cup of cold coffee untouched beside her. She'd been staring at the same spot on the wall for the past hour. Roy stepped inside and nodded to Melissa. His suit was expensive now, tailored, nothing like the Goodwill finds he'd worn through law school. But his hands still had calluses. Some things don't change. Been waiting 6 years for this meeting, Roy said, setting the portfolio on my desk beside the Steinway. Time to show you what we're holding. The office smelled of rust and motor oil, same as always. Roy unzipped the case and spread documents across the surface. Deeds with county seals. Loan agreements thick with legalese. Corporate filings from 3 states. A paper empire, hidden in plain sight. Roy picked up the first document. A property deed, certified and stamped. The mansion. You know the numbers. He set it aside and moved to the next stack. Melissa moved closer. She picked up the deed, turned it over, examined the county seal. You bought our house, she said. Before I even knew the marriage was failing, I bought a safety net. I met her eyes, never planned to use it as a weapon. Roy continued through the stack. Construction loan agreements from First Regional Bank, Citizens Commercial, and Midwest Savings. Each one stamped, assigned at the bottom, transfer dates ranging from 2019 to 2022. Riverbend Commercial Plaza, Bradley's flagship. Roy tapped the loan documents. $14 million in construction financing from 3 banks. All 3 loans acquired by your entities at discount. Callable on 30 days' notice. Callable meaning what? Melissa asked. Meaning I can demand full repayment in 30 days, I said. Bradley doesn't have 14 million liquid. He doesn't have 4 million liquid. The moment I make that call, he defaults. Roy spread a map across the desk, the kind of plat survey showing property boundaries and easements. A red circle marked the Riverbend site. The ground lease. He pointed to the circled parcel. Bradley built a $40 million project on land he doesn't own. The lease expires in 8 months. Only Dunaway Properties, INC, can renew it. And if it doesn't renew, Every tenant in the building gets a force majeure notification. Pre-sold naming rights get refunded. Pre-leased retail space reverts to month at triple the rate. Roy's expression sharpened, the look of a man who'd spent 9 years learning to weaponize contracts. The building becomes worthless without the land beneath it. I looked at the plat survey. Riverbend Commercial Plaza, Bradley's monument to himself. The Ashworth Legacy Center, he wanted to call it, named after a family that hadn't owned anything real in decades. Roy tapped the final document. $23 million in liabilities. Assets worth maybe half that in a forced sale. Melissa set down the deed. Her hand was shaking, but her voice was steady. He borrowed $23 million against things he doesn't own. He borrowed against things he thinks he owns. Roy pulled out a whiteboard from behind the filing cabinet, already covered with organizational charts. Lines connecting boxes. Boxes containing company names. Arrows showing ownership flows. Let me show you the structure. The whiteboard looked like an organizational chart from an SEC investigation. Dunaway Holdings, LLC, at the center. 17 subsidiary entities branching outward. Shell companies in Wyoming, Delaware, Nevada. Each one holding a piece of the Ashworth Empire. Riverbend Development Partners. Roy tapped a box near the bottom. Bradley's special purpose entity for the Plaza project. 5 limited partners required for major decisions. Unanimous consent clause. Let me guess, Melissa said. 3 of the 5 partners are your father's shells. 51% voting rights. Never exercised. Roy drew a circle around the 3 company names. Bradley thinks he controls his own project. He's actually a minority owner. I studied the chart. 6 years of acquisitions mapped out in blue marker and careful lines. Every loan, every lease, every corporate structure. All of it pointing back to a salvage yard owner in grease-stained flannel. Cross-collateralization, Roy continued. Bradley's loans are linked. Default on one property triggers default on all. The moment you call the mansion loan, the plaza loans accelerate. The moment the plaza loans accelerate, the bank accounts freeze. One domino and the whole thing falls. A knock at the door. Frank Mosley stepped in, still in uniform, radio crackling on his shoulder, his body camera clipped to his chest. Got what you need, Frank said. He handed Roy a thumb drive. Full body cam footage, plus the neighbor's written statement. She saw the whole thing from her kitchen window. Roy plugged the drive into his laptop. The video filled the screen. I'd seen pieces of it on Melissa's phone. Now I watched the full recording. Frank's approach to the mansion. The front door opening. Melissa emerging with garbage bags. Sophie being guided by a suited man, his hand on her shoulder, her face streaked with tears. The audio was clear. Too clear. Make sure they understand. They're not to return. Bradley's voice. That satisfied tone I'd heard across dinner tables for 8 years. Your father. Tell your father the trash belongs at the junkyard. The video continued. Sophie crying, Melissa pleading, the security guard's hand on Melissa's arm gripping hard enough to leave marks. Roy paused the footage. The mansion's security system uploaded to cloud storage, he said. Your security company retrieved the internal footage this afternoon. Multiple angles. Clear timestamp. The guard grabbing Melissa's arm is visible from 3 cameras. He opened another file. Split-screen footage from inside the mansion. Sophie's room. The hallway. The front foyer. Each frame showed a piece of the story, Sophie screaming as a stranger touched her things. the guard's fingers closing around Melissa's bicep. Bradley watching from the doorway, adjusting his cufflinks. "Chain of custody is clean," Frank said. "Body camera footage goes straight to the county server. Mansion footage was retrieved through your contracted security company. Authenticated timestamps. Metadata intact." Melissa stared at the screen, her daughter's terror, frozen in high definition. "The custody hearing," she said. "When?" 72 hours. Roy pulled up a calendar on his laptop. "Emergency filing, expedited timeline. Judge Margaret Chen." "Chen," Frank said. "Good draw." "She doesn't suffer fools. Especially wealthy fools," Roy added. "She threw out a custody motion last year because the father's attorney billed $40,000 for a frivolous filing. Made him pay the opposing counsel's fees out of pocket." I looked at the organizational chart, the web of companies, the callable loans, the ground lease, the security footage, the Ashworth Foundation Gala, I said. "When is it?" Roy checked his calendar. 5 days. Saturday night at the Riverstone Grand Ballroom. That's where he's planning to debut his new chapter. Fresh start. New life without Melissa. "The venue's operating company contracts through your entities," Roy said. "So does the catering service. And the event insurance." I closed the leather portfolio. The brass clasps clicked shut with a sound like a lock engaging. "Then that's where we'll end this." Melissa looked at me. The gala? Same room where he planned to celebrate. Same people who heard him call me trash at country club dinners. I set my hand on the portfolio. Let him bring an audience. Roy began packing up his documents. The whiteboard stayed propped against the filing cabinet, 17 shell companies waiting for their moment. "We handle the custody hearing first," he said. 3 days from now. Chen sees that footage. Bradley's emergency filing gets thrown out. Temporary custody goes to Melissa. Then we have 5 days to prepare for the gala. Frank headed for the door. "I'll be at the hearing. Off duty, but present. Sometimes judges like seeing witnesses available." "Thank you," Melissa said. Frank paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Your father paid my way through the academy when I couldn't afford the training fees. 30 years ago, some debts don't expire." He left. The door closed behind him. Melissa sat at the desk, studying the organizational chart. Her finger traced the lines connecting shell companies, following the paper trail from Ashworth Properties to Dunaway Control. "You've been preparing for this since before I got married." "Not for this specifically." I looked at the Steinway, Eleanor's mother's piano, wedged between filing cabinets of corporate documents. I saw who he was, saw who his family was, started buying safety nets. 23 million in safety nets. It added up. I walked to the window. Outside, the salvage yard stretched into darkness. 15 acres of sorted metal, the empire that funded everything else. Never thought I'd need to use it. Hoped you'd prove me wrong about him. Melissa was quiet for a moment. Then she stood, walked to where I was, and put her hand on my arm. "I'm glad you were right." Sophie stirred on the couch, her rabbit pressed against her cheek. 7 years old, already learning that the world wasn't fair. That fathers could be monsters. That security meant something different than she'd been taught. Roy zipped his portfolio closed. "I'll file the response to Bradley's custody motion first thing tomorrow. Attach the security footage. Copy of the neighbor's statement. Frank's body camera documentation. When do we use the property documents?" Melissa asked. "The mansion deed." "The loans, not yet." Roy tucked the portfolio under his arm. "We save that for the gala. Maximum impact. Bradley finds out he owns nothing in front of everyone who matters to him. I nodded. The same audience that had laughed when Bradley called me the junkyard dog. The same people who'd watched Constance seat me with the catering staff. They would witness his fall. Hearing in 3 days, I said. Then the gala. Roy headed for the door. Get some rest, Virgil. The next week's going to be busy. He left. Headlights swept across the windows as his car pulled away, then darkness returned. Melissa gathered the coffee cups, carried them to the small sink in the corner. Normal movements, routine gestures, the kind of thing Eleanor used to do when she needed to think. Dad! I turned from the window. Thank you for everything you built, for being prepared when I wasn't. I crossed the room and pulled her into a hug. My daughter, Eleanor's daughter. Strong in ways Bradley never understood. Get some sleep, I said. We've got a hearing to win and a gala to attend. She smiled. That harder smile I'd seen in the Walmart parking lot. The smile of a woman done apologizing. After she settled beside Sophie on the couch, I sat at the piano. The Steinway's keys were yellowed, the hammers worn from decades of use. Eleanor's mother had played this instrument in a farmhouse parlor during the Depression. Eleanor had learned her scales on it. Now it sat between filing cabinets full of corporate documents, a salvage yard office containing more value than Bradley Ashworth's entire supposed fortune. I played the opening bars of Chopin's Nocturne, the Opus 9 that Eleanor loved. Soft, the notes barely carrying past the piano bench. Sophie slept. Melissa slept. Outside, the sorted metal caught moonlight, rust-colored shapes against the dark. In 5 days, Bradley would learn that patience wasn't weakness. It was aim. The Riverstone Grand Ballroom gleamed with crystal chandeliers and exposed brick. 200 guests filled the space. Tailored suits and designer gowns, vintage wines and catered appetizers on silver trays. Every country club family who'd ever heard Bradley call me the junkyard dog. Every business associate who'd nodded along when he complained about my grease-stained fingernails at Thanksgiving. They were about to hear something different. The custody hearing had gone exactly as Roy predicted. Judge Chen threw out Bradley's emergency motion in under an hour after seeing Frank's body camera footage. Melissa had temporary full custody. Bradley's attorneys filed an appeal that would take months to work through the system. By then, his accounts would be frozen and his house would belong to me on paper and in practice. Roy Beckham walked beside me, the leather portfolio tucked under his arm. His suit cost more than my truck, but he still carried himself like the mechanic he'd been 20 years ago. Some things don't change. I wore my usual. Jeans faded at the knees. Flannel shirt from the Tractor Supply clearance rack. Work boots that had walked through engine oil and copper shavings and the ashes of Eleanor's funeral. Nothing about my appearance suggested I belonged here. Bradley spotted us from across the room. He stood near the bar, champagne flute in hand, surrounded by men in suits who laughed at something he'd said. His smile was fixed in place like a campaign poster. The smile froze. His hand moved toward his cufflinks. Then it stopped. He leaned toward an aide, his lips barely moving. The security team materialized from the crowd. 2 men in dark suits, earpieces visible, moving with purpose toward where Roy and I stood near the entrance. I didn't move. The lead guard approached. Young guy, former military, by his bearing. He stopped 3 feet away and looked at me. Then at Roy, then back at me. His supervisor stepped forward. Marcus Webb, a man I'd hired 6 years ago to run the security company that contracted with half the venues in the county. including this one. The young guards exchanged confused glances. Marcus gave a slight bow. Mr. Dunaway, sir. His voice carried just enough for nearby guests to hear. Your table is ready. Bradley's face went pale. He set his champagne down too hard, liquid sloshing over the rim. His eyes darted around the room, trying to remember who owned the security company, trying to trace contracts he'd never bothered to read. I walked toward his table. The crowd made space for someone walking with purpose. Conversations faltered as I passed. Heads turned. The junkyard owner in flannel moving through a sea of evening wear. Bradley's reserved table sat near the windows, prime position for the man hosting the gala. Constance Ashworth occupied the chair to his left, her silver hair styled, her expression the controlled mask of someone who'd spent 60 years maintaining appearances. Linda Ashworth Pierce, Bradley's sister, sat across from her mother, a phone in her hand, her attention split between the screen and the approaching confrontation. A dozen of Bradley's closest business associates filled the remaining seats. Men who'd invested in Riverbend Commercial Plaza. Men who'd believed in the Ashworth name. I stopped at the edge of the table. Bradley. My voice was low, barely above a whisper. The same volume I used when explaining something important to Sophie. I need you to hear every word. He laughed. Short, sharp, the nervous sound of a man who didn't understand the situation yet. This is a private event, Virgil. I don't know how you got past security, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Roy set the leather portfolio on the white tablecloth. The brass clasps clicked as he opened it. I pulled out the first document. A property deed, the county seal visible in the upper corner, my name typed under the heading Beneficial Owner. This is the deed to your house. I set it on the table. My name's on it, has been since 2018. Bradley's laugh changed pitch. Higher, tighter. That's absurd. That house has been in my family for 3 generations. Your grandfather built it. Your grandmother refinanced it. Your father borrowed against it. And when the bankruptcy court liquidated the estate, Dunaway Holdings, LLC purchased the deed at auction. I tapped the document. Certified by the county recorder. Stamped and filed. The table had gone silent. The business associates exchanged glances. One of them, a man I recognized from the Riverbend investor meetings, leaned forward to look at the deed. I produced the second document, a stack of loan agreements, each one bearing the assigned stamp at the bottom. These are your construction loans. $14 million in total from 3 regional banks. I spread them across the tablecloth. I bought them at discount over the past 4 years. They're callable on 30 days' notice. The nervous laughter died. Bradley stared at the loan documents. His jaw worked. His fingers found his cufflinks, but the gesture was incomplete, a reflex without its usual power. How much do you want? His voice had changed. Calculation now. Negotiation. The only language he understood. I pulled out the third document. A ground lease agreement. The Riverbend Commercial Plaza address. Printed at the top. This is the land under your flagship project. I set it beside the others. The lease I control expires in 8 months. Without renewal, your entire development becomes worthless. The $40 million monument you plan to name after yourself. You can't do this to me. Bradley stood. His chair scraped against the floor, loud in the sudden quiet. Nearby tables had stopped their conversations. Heads turned throughout the ballroom. Do you know who I am? His voice rose. My family built half this town. My grandfather created jobs for thousands of people. You're a junkyard owner. A scrap dealer. You sort garbage for a living." I waited until he finished, until the words hung in the air, until every guest within 20 feet had heard Bradley Ashworth III describe me exactly as he always had. Then I spoke, voice low enough that people leaned in to hear. "You're the man who threw my daughter and granddaughter into a parking lot with garbage bags." Bradley's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "You're the man who had security guards put bruises on Melissa's arm while your 7-year-old screamed." I let each word land. "You're the man who told a little girl her family was trash." The silence spread outward like ripples in water. Constance's hand trembled. She set down her wine glass before it could spill. Linda had stopped looking at her phone. "And you're the man who owns nothing." I gathered the documents, stacked them neatly. "Oh, everything you have. The house, the company, the project you planned to name after yourself. It's all mine, has been for years." Bradley stood frozen. His jaw worked again, but no words came. Constance rose from her chair, drawing herself up to full height. Her hands gripped the table edge. "This is some kind of fraud." Her voice shook. "I don't know what scheme you're attempting, but our attorneys will have you arrested before." Roy produced a manila folder from the portfolio. He opened it and withdrew a document bearing the county recorder's certification stamp. Title: Abstracts, Mrs. Ashworth. Public Records. He set them on the table. "Your family's properties have been owned by Dunaway entities for the past 6 years. Every deed is registered with the county. Every transfer followed proper legal procedures. Stamped, verified, and available for public inspection." Constance stared at the documents. Linda reached for the title, Abstracts. She read them slowly, flipping pages, her legal training evident in the way she studied the fine print. When she looked up, her eyes went not to me, but to her brother. Horror. That was the expression, the dawning realization that the empire she'd expected to inherit was built on sand. The Riverbend investors had risen from their seats. They crowded around the documents, voices overlapping. "The ground lease is real? If he controls the land, the project collapses. I put $3 million into that development." Bradley's voice cut through the noise. "This isn't over." He pointed at me, his hand shaking. "I'll fight this. Every court. Every appeal. I'll spend years tying you up in litigation." I buttoned my flannel shirt, the same gesture I made every morning before walking into the salvage yard. "You can try." I held his gaze. "But you'll be fighting with lawyers you can't pay, from a house you don't own, about a project you don't control." I turned to leave. The crowd parted again. This time, the movement felt different. Less curiosity, more respect. The junkyard owner in flannel, walking away from the man in the tailored suit. Behind me, I heard Constance's voice rise in sharp rebuke. Linda's questions about trust fund implications. The investors demanding answers Bradley couldn't provide. Roy fell into step beside me. We reached the ballroom doors. Marcus Webb held them open. "Mr. Dunaway," he nodded, "your car is waiting." I stepped into the cool evening air. The river reflected the lights of the city, quiet and patient. Behind me, the Ashworth Foundation Gala continued. 200 guests, processing what they'd witnessed. A man they'd considered untouchable, exposed as owning nothing. A junkyard owner in flannel, revealed as the true power. Roy opened the passenger door of his sedan. "Tomorrow, I'll begin the formal loan acceleration process. 30 days from notice, Bradley faces demands totaling $23 million. His personal accounts will freeze as the cross-collateralization clauses trigger. I climbed into the car. And the mansion? Eviction notices ready to file. He'll have 30 days to vacate the property his grandfather built. The sedan pulled away from the Riverstone Grand Ballroom. In the rearview mirror, I watched the crystal chandeliers glowing through the windows. Sophie was waiting at the salvage yard with Melissa, 7 years old, clutching a one-eared rabbit, learning that the world wasn't always fair. But sometimes, patience finally paid off. The custody hearing had lasted 47 minutes. Judge Margaret Chen, a small woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, reviewed the evidence packet Roy had assembled. Body camera footage from Deputy Frank Mosley. Security recordings from the mansion. Time-stamped photographs of the bruise on Melissa's arm. Bradley's attorneys had flown in from Chicago. 3 of them, at $800 an hour each, seated at a mahogany table that cost more than my first truck. Roy stood alone at the opposing table. The leather portfolio sat closed beside him. Judge Chen pressed play on the monitor. The footage filled the screen. Frank's approach to the circular drive. The front door opening. Sophie screaming as a stranger's hand touched her shoulder. Melissa clutching garbage bags, tears on her face, pleading with security guards who wouldn't meet her eyes. Your father. Tell your father the trash belongs at the junkyard. Bradley's voice, recorded on 3 cameras, his smile visible from multiple angles. The lead Chicago attorney leaned toward his client, whispered something. Bradley's jaw tightened. Judge Chen paused the footage. Counsel, she said to Bradley's team, your client filed for emergency custody, citing concerns about the child's safety in her mother's care. That's correct, Your Honor. Chen removed her glasses. Set them on the bench. I've reviewed testimony from Deputy Mosley, who witnessed security personnel physically removing a 7-year-old from her home while she screamed for her mother. I've reviewed security footage showing your client's employee grabbing Mrs. Dunaway Ashworth hard enough to leave visible bruising. I've reviewed audio of your client instructing staff to tell his daughter's grandfather that the family is, and I quote, trash. She picked up the emergency motion filing, held it at arm's length. Emergency custody is granted when a child faces imminent danger in their current environment. She set the filing down. The evidence before me suggests the imminent danger was in your client's home, not his wife's. Bradley's lead attorney started to rise. Chen held up one hand. Motion denied. Temporary custody is awarded to the mother pending a full investigation of the father's fitness as a parent. She gathered her papers. I'm also referring this matter to Child Protective Services for review of the eviction circumstances. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. Bradley sat motionless. His attorneys exchanged glances. The lead man from Chicago was already calculating how to bill for an appeal that would take months to process. Melissa gripped my hand under the table. Sophie was at the salvage yard with Ernie Patterson's wife, building a castle out of aluminum cans. We walked out of the courthouse into March sunlight. That had been 3 days before the gala, before Bradley learned what he never owned, before the cascade began. Within 48 hours of the gala, the legal machinery started moving. Dunaway Holdings, LLC, formalized the eviction notice on the mansion. The leaseback arrangement, which had allowed Bradley to occupy a property he'd never owned, terminated effective in 30 days. Roy drafted the letter himself. Plain language. No legal flourish. You are hereby notified that your tenancy at the above referenced property will terminate on April 15th. Please remove all personal belongings by that date. Items remaining after the termination date will be inventoried as property of Dunaway Holdings, LLC. Bradley's personal assistant signed for the certified letter at 9:47 a.m. By noon, Roy was on the phone with First Regional Bank, Citizens Commercial, and Midwest Savings. As the current holder of Bradley's construction loans, Dunaway Properties, Inc. was exercising its right to accelerate repayment. The cross-collateralization clauses worked exactly as designed. Default on one loan triggered default on all. Bradley's personal accounts, pledged as additional security during the original lending process, were frozen by 3 separate institutions before the end of business. The salary stopped next. Roy appeared at Ashworth Development Group headquarters representing the company's actual creditors. Operating accounts were frozen pending loan restructuring. The $400,000 annual draw that Bradley had treated as his birthright stopped with a single phone call. I heard about it secondhand. Frank Mosley's nephew worked as a paralegal at the firm handling the restructuring. Bradley had thrown a coffee mug at his office wall, screamed at his secretary, called his mother. Constance Ashworth arrived within the hour, left 40 minutes later without speaking to anyone. The Riverbend Partners meeting happened on day 3. Bradley walked into the conference room at the project's temporary headquarters expecting a routine update on construction delays. Instead, he found Roy seated at the head of the table, flanked by 2 attorneys I'd never met. Roy pushed a document across the polished surface. Mr. Ashworth, as you're aware, Riverbend Development Partners requires unanimous consent for major decisions. I'm here representing 3 limited partners who hold a combined 51% voting interest in this entity. Bradley's face went through several stages: confusion, disbelief, the beginning of understanding. That's impossible. I selected every partner personally. You selected the partnership structures personally, Roy corrected. The beneficial owners were never disclosed because they weren't required to be under the operating agreement you drafted. He produced a second document. Voting certificates from 3 shell companies, each one registered in states where beneficial ownership remained private. The majority has voted to remove you as managing partner, effective immediately. Your equity stake remains intact, subject to the partnership's current financial obligations. Bradley gripped the table edge. You can't do this. This project is mine. The Ashworth Legacy Center will never bear your name. Roy gathered his documents. Pre-sold naming rights will be refunded. Pre-leased retail space will receive force majeure notifications. The development will proceed under new management. Bradley stood, his chair toppled backward. I'll sue every one of you. I'll spend years. You'll spend years litigating from a house you don't own with money you don't have about a project you don't control. Roy closed his briefcase. Your attorneys can contact my office to arrange document transfers. He left Bradley standing in an empty conference room. The betrayals multiplied. Linda Ashworth Pierce called Roy 3 days after the partners' meeting. I wasn't present for the conversation, but Roy summarized it that evening at the salvage yard. She wants to protect her trust fund, offered to provide documentation in exchange for assurance that her assets won't be touched. What documentation? Roy set a folder on my desk. Bank statements from the Caymans. Email threads with Bradley's assistant that suggested a relationship lasting more than 2 years. Text messages describing Melissa as clingy and provincial. Notes in Bradley's handwriting outlining strategies to limit Melissa's access to family finances. She's been keeping records, Roy said. Insurance, in case her brother ever turned on her. And now she's using them. Her brother humiliated himself publicly. His accounts are frozen. His company is in receivership. His wife has custody of his daughter. Roy shrugged. Linda calculated which side holds actual power. She made her choice. I looked at the documents. 2 years of an affair. Detailed plans to isolate Melissa from her family. Financial manipulation designed to make her dependent. Use whatever's relevant for the custody case. The rest goes in a drawer. The affair evidence alone would what? Humiliate him more? He's already destroyed. I closed the folder. Melissa and Sophie were safe. That was enough. The contractor underground mobilized without my involvement. Plumbers who'd been stiffed on payments. Electricians who'd been threatened with lawsuits when they demanded what they were owed. Construction workers ordered to cut corners on safety and then blamed when inspectors found violations. They lined up to provide statements. Not to me, but to Harold Vance's nephew at the county building inspector's office. Ernie Patterson, who'd inspected Bradley's projects for years, now had documentation to support a formal review. I heard fragments at May's Diner. Thursday, coffee with Frank and Harold and the others. Riverbend's facing a stop work order, Harold said. Fire suppression system doesn't meet code. Someone signed off on it anyway. Let me guess who. Bradley's signature on the variance request. Probably thought no one would ever check. The country club circuit shifted within 2 weeks. The same dining rooms where Bradley had called me the junkyard dog now hummed with different conversations. Hushed voices. Careful distances maintained from anyone named Ashworth. Frank's wife overheard Constance at a charity luncheon. The older woman had been seated at a back table, alone, while conversation stopped when she approached. She looked like she'd aged 10 years, Frank reported. Nobody would speak to her. She left before the appetizers arrived. The wine cellar was inventoried on day 23. I didn't attend. Roy sent representatives from the asset management company we'd contracted, 2 professionals, with tablets and temperature gauges, cataloging 200 bottles Bradley had collected over a decade. The collection was worth approximately $60,000. Vintages from Bordeaux and Burgundy, Napa Valley, and Sonoma. Bottles Bradley had purchased at auction and displayed in a temperature-controlled room designed to impress business associates. He never drank them. Ownership mattered more than enjoyment. Status over substance. The representatives photographed each bottle, logged serial numbers and estimated values, added everything to the Dunaway Holdings asset register. On day 30, Bradley left the mansion. I didn't watch, didn't need to. Melissa told me about it later. She'd driven past on her way to pick up Sophie from school. A moving truck sat in the circular drive. 2 workers carried boxes, while Bradley stood on the lawn, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing at nothing. No family present, no friends helping with the move. Just a man with a phone and a temper and nowhere to go. He'd found a rental apartment in the suburbs. 3 bedrooms. No pool house or wine cellar or Georgian columns. The kind of place he would have mocked a year ago. The mansion, the salary, the project, the custody, the standing, each one stripped away in 30 days. That evening, I sat at Eleanor's piano. Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch again, her rabbit tucked under her chin. Melissa was in the back room, reviewing the final custody paperwork that would make her arrangement permanent. I played the Opus 9, soft, the way Eleanor preferred. The notes filled the salvage yard office, mixing with the distant sounds of settling metal and night birds. Bradley Ashworth III had lost everything: his house, his income, his project, his daughter, his standing. He'd lost it all by underestimating a man in grease-stained flannel who'd been holding every card for 6 years. I finished the nocturne and closed the fallboard. Sophie stirred, her eyes opened halfway. "Grandpa, what's that song? Something your grandmother loved." She smiled, already drifting back to sleep. "Play it again sometime. I would." Loving this so far? Smash like and rate my story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Thank you for being here. Melissa and Sophie live in a 3-bedroom house on Maple Street. No mortgage, no dependencies, no strings attached to anyone named Ashworth. I bought it outright the week after Bradley vacated the mansion. The house cost a fraction of what I spent acquiring Bradley's empire. White siding, blue shutters, a backyard with a swing set and enough grass for a dog. We'll probably get next spring. Sophie visits the salvage yard every Saturday. She arrives at 9, still in pajamas sometimes, and changes into the coveralls I keep hanging by the office door. Size small, navy blue, Sophie stitched on the pocket in yellow thread. The girl gets dirty, gets loud, asks questions about everything from hydraulic pressure to why copper turns green when it sits outside too long. Bradley forbade these visits once. Called the yard. Too dangerous, too dirty, too common. Said an Ashworth shouldn't spend time around scrap metal and grease. Sophie isn't an Ashworth anymore. Not in any way that matters. This Saturday evening, she sits beside me on the piano bench. The Steinway takes up the same space it always has, wedged between filing cabinets. But the office feels different now. The last light catches the piano keys, yellowed with age. The sorting line outside has gone quiet for the day. I play the opening bars of the Opus 9, Eleanor's favorite. Sophie watches my hands move across the keys. Her own fingers rest on her lap, twitching slightly with the rhythm. "Can I try?" she asks. I shift to make room. She reaches for the lower register, picks out 3 notes that don't quite match the melody but land close enough to count. Like this, she presses another key. Close. Move your thumb 1 note to the left. She adjusts, tries again. The sound comes cleaner this time. We sit like that for a while. Me playing, her finding notes. Neither of us speaking because some things don't need words. The salvage yard stretches beyond the window. 15 acres of sorted metal and crushed cars and environmental contracts worth more than Bradley's entire supposed fortune. The empire I built from my father's failure. The safety net that became ammunition when it needed to be. My daddy used to say, "A patient man eats the ripest fruit." I never understood that. Not really. I thought patience meant waiting for something better to come along. Letting time do the work. But that's not it. Patience is aim. It's watching, learning, positioning yourself so that when the moment arrives, you don't have to rush. You don't have to improvise. You just reach out and take what's already yours. 6 years of watching Bradley mock my daughter. 6 years of buying properties he thought he owned. 6 years of holding cards he never knew existed. And then 30 days to end him. Sophie plays another note. Gets it right this time. "Grandpa?" "Yes, this is my favorite place." I rest my hand on her shoulder. Mine too, always was.